I was the 4th elected chief ever. Before that, it was all heritage. Yeah, passed on generation to generation. The first priority was get water onto Tla'amin, which there's no water in. So we got a pipeline from Tla'amin Lake to the village. I know every water hole there is on this coast because they'd have signs like 2 rocks together on the beach. You know right away there's water there, eh? And so you go and look for it. Sure enough, there'll always be fresh water coming out of the ground. Yeah. In Harwood itself, facing Texada, you can go in low water mark and dig in the sand and you'd get water. And then the tide would come in and wash it away. That was the most important thing to our people, was know where the water is.
We have 3 main rivers that run through parts of our lands, and Tla'amin River, the Oakover River, and Theodosia River. And all 3 rivers are salmon-bearing rivers. And so they're really important to our nation and our people. They were historical village sites.
Wherever there is a mouth of a river, we had a settlement. The settlements moved. People moved around the territory depending on what they were harvesting. So people were out primarily and came back together in the winter.
You know, water and fish are very interconnected, so it's important to protect the water as much as we can, and also looking at the future for any drinking water resources.
We are a level 2 water treatment plant, and it is a slow sand filtration. The chemicals we use are chlorine and aluminum sulfate, and we get our water from Tla'amin Lake. The rain falls into Tla'amin Lake. We have an intake. The intake comes right down to our pipe gallery, and then from our pipe gallery we go to the flocculation tanks where we add the aluminum sulfate that basically takes all the suspended solids from the water and lets them settle. And from there it goes to the slow sand filtration lagoons. And from the lagoons it goes right to our chlorine contact tanks. So we have a chlorine contact tank followed by a secondary contact, and then from the secondary contact it goes right to our reservoirs, and from the reservoirs it goes right to the distribution system, right to your tap.
Tla'amin Nation received funding from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to undertake a project that had to do with habitat protection. The nation wisely decided that the foreshore and the ocean shoreline, to understand that ecosystem, it was important to go up into the watershed and to begin there with the planting cycle.
Whenever we're thinking about watersheds and we're thinking about creeks and rivers, we need to think about what we're doing on land, and we need to think about what we're doing up high in the watershed, as well as what we're doing right around those creeks and streams to make sure they're healthy and they're functioning properly.
The planning process begins with a strong and active working committee. And that working committee is a group of people, both government, experts, and Tla'amin Nation people, membership, elders, to look at this plan from the perspective of the land use activities that are going on and have gone on in the watershed.
Over the past few days we've had a workshop at the Coast Town Centre Hotel there, and we had a lot of excellent presentations and a lot of different people who gave us some feedback on water management. And
planning is not a Western science or European or colonial process. First Nations have been planning forever. They planned about where to settle, where to migrate, when and where to hunt, where and when to fish. So the whole idea of Indigenous culture on the land is all about planning. We often forget about that. However, this plan is trying to bring together both of those cultures. So the two worldviews, the Western science worldview and the Indigenous worldview, are coming together. Some talk about two-eyed seeing approach, where two eyes, one eye being Indigenous and the other eye viewing the world through a Western science lens, can bring the best of both, a parallel approach to planning, which will embrace the beauty of both systems. And as we go through as a working committee, we'll identify these locations of concern. The next step is to actually visit those locations and to do field trips. And we've undertaken several of those, and we'll be doing more field trips into Theodosia, up into Tla'amin, and into Oakover. And in that, identifying firsthand field experience, taking video, photography, mapping where these areas of concern exist within the watershed.
the importance of a watershed pretty much starts right from the highest mountaintop of that area. So even though our community and lands are at the mouth of the river, there's so much we're being impacted, and not just us, it's the fish, more importantly, the habitat, the vegetation that are being impacted from, you know, a lot of the logging up above and logging roads. And
but looking at the issues over the years with the clear cutting up in the upper area here in the watershed, it's having an effect on the whole water system in itself, with where we normally have good heavy water flow during this time of the year. The water is there, it's not evident. We'll get flash flooding, we'll get water coming in all at once, and then next week there's no water. We have these issues happening up in the Theodosia right now, where it's been pretty well been clear cutted to death by private property owners, where we have actually warming of the water, where we have the clear cutting and the warmer water, therefore creating bacterial life and things like that, where different organisms in the river can't thrive. That we also have pesticide applications after the logging has taken place, where they were done previously by air. The pollutants in the aerial sprays actually get into the trees and the conifers and deciduous trees and end up in the tributaries, which in turn feed the river, and then the organisms in the river that those fish live on die off, and then the nutrient deposit in those rivers become depleted, therefore diluting the populations of salmon in those river systems.
So it's really important for us to protect water, to protect the resources, and to understand that water is not in itself by itself. Water affects everything around it. It affects the rivers, it affects the fish, it affects the habitat, it affects the environment, and it affects our people. We live where we live for a reason. Our people live at the mouth of Theodosia, the mouth of Oakover, the mouth of Tla'amin River. We lived at the mouth of Powell River, and we had encampments on almost every river in our territory. So we know that water is critical to our people. We're people of water. We can't survive without it.
When you clear cut large portions of a watershed, you have a number of impacts. Firstly, you can actually change the overall hydrology of the river itself, because when you have a forested landscape, it actually holds water on the landscape longer than a cleared landscape, because you have a lot of spongy soils, you have the trees themselves and their roots which take up water, and you tend to get, after a clear cut, more during heavy rainfalls, you get sharper flooding in the river than you would have seen before. Clear cuts tend to be quite hot, whereas big forest, old trees create a cooler microclimate. Forest vegetation, leaves and branches and twigs falling into those creeks, which are then shredded by certain types of aquatic invertebrates, which we class as shredders, things like caddisflies and the like. They shred the leaf material coming in, and they break that material down, which then flows downstream and then feeds other aquatic invertebrates, which in turn feed other aquatic invertebrates, which in turn feed the fish. So when we lose forest cover around these small creeks and streams, which are high up in the watershed, we actually have a domino effect where we begin to affect what's happening in the lower reaches of the watershed in fish-bearing creeks and streams.
One of the main things that our people ate is chum. Like we do smoke the chum in the winter months and put it away for storage for the winter and for the year. And so all three rivers have chum in it, but apparently the most delicious chum species is Theodosia River. And I always remember the story from one of our elders, Elsie Paul. She said the Theodosia River has like the best tasting chum, and I think she used to go up there in the seasonal camping and go smoke their fish up there. In 1952, they put a dam on it at about 10 kilometers up, which redirects about 80% of the flow now into Olson Lake, which then flows into Powell Lake. So
our elders tell us you used to be able to walk across the river. There was so many fish in Theodosia. We know that's a fact. So, you know, we've seen that river go into drastic decline by the diversion of the water.
I don't really want to put it too rudely, but we've kind of been pushed around by government twice, you know. From Powell Lake, there's a dam there, and now there's a dam at Theodosia and two of our historical village sites. So I get a little bit frustrated when, you know, trying to explain to government when we're trying to seek funding or we're trying to explain our rights and trying to ask questions, why do they have the water rights for so long when, you know, when the fish need the water, and we've robbed the fish of that fresh water.
Prior to them putting in the dam, the fish were 50,000 strong running in there every year. And after the dam was put in several years later, there was a mere 5,000 to 6,000 fish returning there annually based on low water flow and the loss of that habitat, leaving Tla'amin or Tla'amin now in a stranglehold of, you know, relying on those fish for sustainability of what we were going to do with it and how we're going to best fix it.
When we put dams on these rivers, like in the case here, where we're on the dam at Theodosia River, which is capturing a lot of the cobble and the gravels that would have originally flowed downstream into the lower reaches of Theodosia and provided salmon spawning habitat. That gravel is now being caught up by the dam and it's not flowing downstream. We're also seeing that dam basically diverts a huge amount of the flow of the Theodosia during times of high flow, and as a result the lower reaches of the Theodosia aren't having these natural flushing flows that they would have had in high water times. Everything that's happening upstream along the Theodosia River and the watershed is affecting Tla'amin's traditional use of that piece of land at the mouth of the Theodosia, because it's affecting salmon and salmon habitat.
The opportunity to plan for this area, to think about the future of these watersheds, acknowledging the past and some of past activities, but looking to improve the watershed, protect it and to improve it, is an incredible challenge for the nation. And I'm just happy to be part of this process to help lead this planning activity. We don't do the plan for the plan itself, we do the plan to implement the plan. So we don't want the plan to sit on a shelf and collect dust. We want it to be a living document, an active, iterative process where the planning phase never really ends. It just moves into implementation. And annually we go back and look at that plan, celebrate what we've done, think about what still needs doing, and then do it. Take the action on the ground to make change. And all that change is about placemaking, making a better watershed, improving the conditions within that watershed for this generation and for the next 7 generations.
What I see for the future is that we need a lot of our youth, and or just anybody, from our community, or to create those positions to manage water, to have a specialist who can be on board with our nation to help us continue to manage this important work. It is not just Tla'amin Nation who needs to work on this watershed protection plan. Everybody has to fit in, like even, provincial government, Flynn Row, DFO, private logging companies.
Hopefully in my lifetime we'll be able to see change so that our youth and our kids do benefit from our efforts here, similar to what the elders did when the treaty was developed here for the nation prior to self-governance. We're leaving the stepping stones for them to keep things rolling and moving along and make sure that everybody is on par and there's any wrongdoing. We're vocal and we're letting them know about it, and we're rehabilitating our watershed and making sure that we have good, safe, clean water to drink, but we also have water in our river system so that we have fish coming back for everybody.
So we need to kind of get to that place where we're foundation planning now. What do we do with all this information? What is our global want for our territory? What do we want out of the water systems? What do we want out of our fishery? What do we want out of the forest? What do we want in the areas of culture? What do we want as our future businesses? We definitely have a capacity need. We need to be guiding our young people into what the world's going to look like in the next 20, 40, 60 years.
Because it's our territory, our traditional territory, and because Tla'amin has land at the mouth of all of those rivers, I feel we need to protect it even more. I think we have a lot of water in our territory, and we need to try and protect it.